Hello everyone and welcome to Tech with Robert to get started with T-SQL course. In this lecture we're going to talk about inner joins. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give a thumbs up on the video if you like what I do. That really helps me to know what I do well and what you guys want me to improve on or focus more on in the future lectures. So without further ado, let's get right into talking about inner joins. So we've talked a little bit about joins overall, why we need joins, what joins are, and what the purpose of it is. And we just mentioned the different type of joins there are, but now we're going to focus specifically on inner join. And so inner join is, as you can see on this table here, we have one table, we call it table 1, and then we have what we call table 2. And so when we do an inner join, we will get all of the matching rows from table 1 and table 2. And so what that means is that, let's say that we're writing a query that selects the customer ID, sales amount, and the sales quantity from table sales, and we write inner join to table customer. And we need to specify a join criteria, or something called a join expression, and that is simply just a common field that we can use to join from both the tables. So in this case we could say that we have in the table sales, we have a field called customer ID, and we also have that same field customer ID in the customers table. So when we query the sales table, we can say that, okay, but we want to perform a join, we want to do an inner join to the table customer. And it's going to be based on the customer ID field from both tables. And so what the inner join here does is it's going to get all of the transactions from what we call the base table, the table that you have in your from statement. I'm going to explain that in much more detail in just a second, but we have something called, we usually call it a base table, and that is what we have in the from statement here. And then the tables that we use to perform inner joins on, we call them lookup tables. But just for now, just think of the base table as the table that we say that we specify here in the from clause. And so we're going to get all of the fields, all of the transactions from the sales table where we find a match in the corresponding lookup table, in this case the table customer. So what this means is that if we have two tables here, let's say we have table customer here, and we only have customer ID 1 and 2. And customer ID 1 is Robert, and customer ID 2 is Mike. And then in the sales table, we have customer ID 1 2 times. Robert has done 2 transactions. Mike has also done 2 transactions. But then we have a customer ID 3 with the sales amount of 300 and a sales quantity of 6. And so if we wrote this query, we would write something like, okay, we want to select the customer ID, the sales amount, and the sales quantity from the base table, table sales, and we give it an alias as S. And then we perform an inner join on the table customer, and we call it C for customer. I misspelled customer here, sorry about that. And then on the sales table's customer ID is equal to the customer's customer ID field. And when we do an inner join, as we said, we're going to get all of the rows that are matched from this table and this table. So what that will give us is the output that we see here. So we will get customer ID 1, both transactions, and then we will get customer ID 2, both transactions. But notice what happens here. Since the customer ID 3 did not match in both tables, it only matched on one of the tables, and it doesn't matter which one. But because when we do an inner join, we need to find a match on the both sides. So both table 1, in this case table sales, and table 2, in this case table customers. Otherwise, we will not display that. So in this case, we will only get, it's going to say, okay, customer ID 1, we look that one up in that table, and we see customer 1, that exists, and we're going to take that into our result. We go to the next row and say 1, it exists, we include that. 2, exists, include, 2 exists, include. But then when we look at and say 3, okay, 3 exists here. When we look that up, we don't find anything, so we will skip that row. So we will only get the 4 first rows here, and so we will get sales amount 100, 150, 200, 250, and this is 450, 600, 700. So if we were to do a subquery around this query, and we say we want to select the sum of the sales amount, as we can see here, since we performed an inner join, we will get the sum. The sum would be 700. But if we only performed a query where we wrote select sum of the sales amount from that table sales, and we didn't have any joins whatsoever, we would get a total of 1000, because then we would include this row as well here, the 300. So that is sort of what I mentioned here in the first slide, that one of the things that you can run into, a bug that you can run into when not knowing what join to use when, or at least you do not fully understand the type of join that you're using, you can get incorrect aggregations. And now that I realize the missing rows and the incorrect aggregations are kind of the same thing, but what we do here is we do an inner join, so we're missing out on this row here, and therefore we're missing out on the number 300 here. So we're not getting that in our query because we use an inner join. So we only select the rows that match in the first table, table sales, and match in the table customer, the second table, table customer here. So we see the customer ID 1 2 times, it exists. Customer ID 2, it exists. Customer 3, it does not exist. So it's going to display no value, and we're not going to take that in our query because we specified that we want an inner join. So only get everything that is matched in the both table 1 and table 2. So I'm going to show a quick query here so we can sort of see this live, and I have prepared a table here that I'm going to link the code in the description so you can run this. But let's say that we write a query and we say, first off we say select the sum of the sales amount from customer sales. Okay, and when we write this query, we say we get 4,150. So we can write a comment here, and when we write another query, we can say we want to select the sales ID, the customer. I'm going to explain in a second what this means. C.CustomerID, the sales amount, and the sales quantity from customer sales. All right. Okay, and then we're going to do inner join customer, and we're going to name this C. So notice here that this is sort of why we need to have aliases in our queries, because otherwise we would need to, let's say we didn't have an alias here, okay, on any of the tables. We needed to say, okay, we wanted to inner join on the customer, and we wanted to say on customer sales dot customer ID is equal to customer.Customer ID. So it's a lot more code, but what we can do instead is we just give an alias to the two tables. So for customer sales, I usually like to write, for example, if I'll just take the first letter in each word. So customer sales. So the first letter in customer is C, and the first letter in sales is S, so I name this CS. And then for the customer, I say C. So then I specify, and I need to specify, we told the SQL Server Engine that we wanted to do an inner join, but then we need to specify a join condition. And so the join condition is going to be the customer ID, because that is the field that we have both on the customer table and the customer sales table. We could not specify a join and use the sales amount because the sales amount column only exists in the customer sales. So we don't have any corresponding sales amount value to look up in the customers table. So we need to find the sort of the common denominator here, which is the customer ID. And so we need to say, okay, so we say inner join on the customer, we name it C, and we name the customer sales table CS. So we say on and then CS dot customer ID is equal to the customer's customer ID. So now you see here we have specified that we want to select the customer ID field from the C. So we write C.Customer ID, and that means that in this case it's going to select the customer ID field from the customers table, because the customers table is what we named C. Watch what happens if I don't put an alias on it. I just say that I want the customer ID. You see these red squiggly lines here, and that means that it does not know which field to use. So when I run this query, it's going to say ambiguous column name customer ID, because in the customer sales table, the name of the customer ID field is customer ID, okay? And we have the same name and the customer. So which one of these two are we going to display? That is why we need to put an alias. So in this case we say, okay, we want to select the customer ID from the customers table, which we named C. So now when we run this query, we see we only get 4 rows here, and the total sales amount here is, we see we have 250, 450, and then we have plus 220. So we have 670, okay? But when we just did the sum of the sales amount from the customers table, and we got 4,150. So now when we did an inner join here, the total sales amount is only 670. So I want you to pause the video for a couple of seconds and try to think and try to come up with a solution and try to explain why that is. Why are we only getting a sum of 670 when we know that the sum of the sales amount from the customer sales table is actually 4,150? So the reason why we get different numbers here is because we use an inner join, and in the inner join we don't have, we have more customers in the sales in the customer sales table than we do in the customers table. So if we select everything from customer and we select everything from customer sales, we see that in the customer sales table we have, in the customer table we have 4 different customers, but in the sales table we have customer ID 5 and 6. So these are the sales that we're missing because we said that we wanted an inner join. So we want to say, okay, inner join, get everything from the customer sales where there is a match in both the customer sales and the customer table. And the only records where there is a match in both tables based on the customer ID is customers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we only get the sales transactions where the customer ID is either 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we don't get the customers where the customer's ID is 5 and 6. So we're missing out on these 3 transactions. And if we add the sales amount up for these 3 rows, we would get, and then we just add them to the 670, we would get the total of 4,150. And the thing here is that this is not automatically incorrect. It depends on the situation, because let's say that someone from the sales department told you that, okay, we need to provide a list here with all of the sales here, but it's very important that we must be able to contact the customer in this list. And let's say, for example, that every row here from the customer table is derived from, let's say, our CRM system. So we only have the contact information to all of our customers who appears in this table. So we don't have any contact information for the customer ID 5 and 6 because these customers don't exist in the customer table. So we would not be able to contact these customers. And so that is one reason why this query here is not necessarily wrong. It just depends on the criteria. So that is what I meant when I said that you kind of need to just understand what the numbers mean and what type of join to use. So what I mean is, like, when you use an inner join, you need to understand what that actually means, okay? Because let's say that, and otherwise that sales representative, your colleague, told you that, okay, but we want to, we want the same list, but regardless if we can contact that customer or not, we just want to see all the sales amount regardless, okay? Then we would use a left join if we cannot guarantee that there's always going to be a match on the customer ID from the customer sales table and the customer table. If we can guarantee that there's always going to be a match, we can use either left or inner join. But in this case, we cannot guarantee that, as we saw, because there are customers here in the customer sales table that does not appear in the customer table. So we cannot guarantee that there's always going to be a match. So in this case, when we use a left join, if we see here, now you see these 3 rows that we were missing, we now get them in this query because with the left join. So we said here, okay, in the customers table is a left join. So get everything from this left table here, regardless if there's a join or not, on the right table, which in this case is the customer. And so now we get those 3 extra rows. And so now when we add all of these numbers together, we will get this total amount here, 4,150. So that is something that you need to do, and I really hope that you kind of understand the difference now between the inner join and the left join. And if you don't do that, watch this video again or follow along on the next video where we're going to talk more about left joins. So I will see you guys in the next lecture.